Howdy folks, and welcome to this R&H visualization tutorial. So in this tutorial, and well, this series of tutorials actually, we're going to be covering a lot of basic modeling techniques. We're going to also be covering some more advanced techniques, and eventually we will be moving into texturing and rendering using VRAY. It's important to note at this point, you can follow along if you don't have VRAY. A lot of what I'm going to be doing is applicable to the standard Cinema 4D render engine, and when I can I will be throwing in a few little tips on how you can adapt it for that workflow. But for the most part I will be using VRAY, so if you do have VRAY it's definitely a bonus. We're going to be modelling this beautiful Georgian townhouse, which I've chosen because it does allow us to cover a lot more techniques than, say, a modern piece of architecture necessarily would. Historic buildings tend to have a lot more embellishment, a lot more detail. You just generally have to pay a lot more attention to references, because a lot of the time you don't actually have a photograph or plans to work from. I mean, it's as simple as that. With modern architecture we're quite spoiled, you know, we have DWGs, we have plans, we have blueprints, we have all sorts of things that aid. Not so with historical buildings. So jumping straight into Cinema 4D, you'll see that my UI is a little bit different to what you might be used to. I know usually tutorials will use the default one to make it easier. I actually am going to be using my own user interface for the very simple reason that it does make life easier, and all we want to do is make life easier. So I'm just going to take a minute here to explain the differences and why I have them. Now of course you can customize yours however you want. Everyone's a bit different, everyone works a bit differently, but the major differences here, which I would strongly advise you give a go, include the fact that I'm using an open attributes panel. So you might have noticed that a lot of people do this. If you have a really complicated project where your hierarchy is rammed with tags and objects and all sorts of stuff, this is going to get so pushed down or pushed over here that you're not really going to be able to use any of the sliders, and you're going to have a hard time setting keyframes. It gets quite awkward, especially for motion graphics. So to avoid this, I just have it open all the time, and you'd be surprised how little screen real estate you actually lose. It's worth bearing in mind, however, if you do use a low res, you are going to lose quite a lot of screen to this, so I would only advise this if you're running 1080p and above. Second thing, down here I have Forester, Corona and VRAY buttons. We only have to worry about VRAY. So moving up here, you'll also see I've got an extra ribbon of icons. These ones at the end you don't really have to worry about in this tutorial. These ones in the middle, I will be explaining these as I use them. However, if you are at all experienced with cinema, you will know what these are, but I will explain them as I go. Finally, we have the modelling tools. So you can access these quite easily if you change your layout to model, like so. I would recommend this for the tutorial if you're not going to be customizing your layout, as it is very handy having these open, and we won't be texturing until much later anyway. So if at any point you get lost, you don't know what I'm using, or you've lost me, I'm going to be advising you to use these basically. So the next thing is I've got this beautiful shade of green, which it isn't, so I think my desktop is a leaf, but it is actually quite practical, because when you're working for a lot of hours, especially in the dark, which you will be in Cinema 4D, it's just better for your eyes. It works for me. It doesn't draw my focus like grey does. And finally, you'll notice that my timeline is up here. It didn't have an identity crisis, I promise. What it is doing up here is it's just a lot easier to keyframe. So it's closer to your spline tools, it's closer to your modelling tools, it's closer to your hierarchy tools. It's just better in general, because the logic of coming down to the texture window to do things to your timeline, it never really seemed logical why Maxon would put that there. So that's why I've got it up here. But yeah, as I say, you can do what you want. This is how I work, and just so you understand what I'm doing as I go along, this is my UI, and I will include my UI in the descriptions, so you can download it and use it if you want. Moving on to the first thing we're going to actually be doing. So we're going to bring in our plans, and we're going to lay this out how you would a usual architecture project, and then we're going to get into making the model itself in the next video. Just a bit about me. I've been using Cinema 4D for 5 years now. I've done everything from games projects through to architecture. I've done a couple of events projects for brands like Google, Amazon, Snapchat. These days I'm doing a lot more motion graphics, but I am still sticking with the heritage work just because it is really exciting stuff to be in. So yeah, I can't wait to share some tips with you guys. Okay, so starting a completely new project, we are going to try and drag our plans in. That is the first step on any architecture project, is trying to work out where your references go and how. So in the perspective window, let's go mode, view settings, back panel. Oh, well, it looks like we can't do anything. The reason for this is quite simply within a perspective mode. So in perspective, you're not going to be able to get a background image. That's going to be infinitely far. That's going to be on the ground. It's just not what we want. So what we need to do at this point, though, is we need to work out what panels we need. We're only going to be working from two references. We're going to be working from a top-down plan, and we're going to be working from a front elevation. So in order to accommodate this, we're going to switch to two views side by side, and we are going to change this view to front. Okay, so we have our front and we have our top. So let's go to front. Let's go to the dots, which are now working because it's a 2D viewport, and let's use this lovely image. Let's go to 80% transparency. This is so that you can see what's going on. If you have this at 0, you don't see a mesh, which isn't particularly useful. Let's go to top. Let's do the same thing for that. Let's go to this one. Let's go 80%. Okay, so we've got them in Cinema. The next thing we need to do is work out how this relates to this. They're obviously JPEG images. They're never going to be accurate to real world scale just dragging them in like this. What we need to do is we need to remedy that. So easiest way, bring in a cube. Okay, best friend is the cube. Let's go to wireframe so we can see what we're doing. Let's scale him to fill the facade. Okay, so that's our anchor point. Let's now go to this view and let's adjust that in that direction. Let's change the Z. So instantly we see a problem. This one is too small. So instead of changing the cube, what we need to do is we need to go over to here again, and we just need to adjust that. So cram that in there. It doesn't have to be exact, but it should be getting on for accurate. Is the most technical thing I think I've ever said. So yeah, we have our cube. This roughly relates to the dimensions of our building, or does it? Let's bring in a figure. Okay, so he's a giant. He's going to bang his head no end trying to get in, and that is the end of our architecture career. So let's move him in front so we know what we're doing. So he isn't happy, he can't get in. He's 180 centimeters tall. So quite obviously the next thing we need to do is fix this by going again to our plan, and we need to make a guess to how big this door is. So in reality that door would be 3 meters tall. If he's 1.8, that means we're looking at getting it about that area, I would say, maybe a little bit smaller than that. I know this doesn't seem exact, but I promise we will be revisiting scale later. Yeah, that looks about right to me. Maybe a little bit smaller. Let's stick with 3000. So this always takes fiddling. You're never going to get this right first time. It is just for an indication so you can actually start modeling. So let's make our cube correlate. Okay, so quite obviously we now have a problem over here. So let's also adjust his to be 3000, just so we have a jumping off point, and clearly we do need to change that slightly. Okay, so we are now pretty much there. We just need to make this so that it fits this dimension. Excellent. Okay, so we now know that this building is vaguely close to reality. A good way we can go beyond and check that is by adding another cube. We all love cubes. As you probably already know, the cube will always enter as a 200 by 200 by 200. And even if you're using millimeters, it becomes 2000. If you're using meters, it becomes 2. I would recommend centimeters for this tutorial, which you're probably already using. Which makes this very, very accurate for determining what exactly is going on. So I'm not going to turn snap on to do this. I'm just going to eyeball it and just get it as close as we can to overlapping its neighbour, like so. I know this seems an archaic way of checking scale, but as I say, it's just so we know what we're doing. Okay, so we have 6 cubes there. So that gives us an estimation point that we can jump off if we just scale this end one. So he's, let's say, 160. So we can do quite simple arithmetic here. We can go 2, 4, 6, 8, 1000, so 10 meters, and then we add on 1.6 meters. So we're talking around 11.6 meters. Looking at the reference, I would say that's pretty close. With historical buildings, you can never know exactly what you're playing with. You're never going to get it millimeter perfect, and you're never going to get anything exact, but you can get pretty close, and I would say we're pretty close. We will be revisiting this later, and as I say, we've now got a very good jumping off point. We're going to get rid of those cubes, just press delete, and yeah, we know what we're playing with. So yeah, that's pretty much everything for initial planning and scaling. In the next tutorial, we are going to be revisiting this a little bit, but we are mostly going to be diving into the modeling and blocking out the structure. So yeah, see you there.